You know, a goat can change your life. It all started sometime between dinner and dessert one late spring evening. You know, we were an average American family. You know, 4 kids, a station wagon, a dog named Chippy, who we picked up at the pound, a yellow tomcat named Willard, and an ever-declining population of goldfish. We lived on North Chancery Street in a small, sleepy town on the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee. The street was lined with beautiful, big spreading sugar maples, and the houses were all very old, many of them built before the Civil War. And our house was large and rambling. It had been no doubt added on over the years, like many of the houses in the neighborhood. It was white clapboard with a generous porch, and it appeared to be floating on a large foundation or barge of shrubs. I was the eldest child at 9. The youngest was Chris at 5. And then there was Scott and Susan, twins, set squarely in the middle at 7. They were my greatest nightmare. The twins were always fussy from the very beginning. The 9 months they shared in the womb seemed to only make them more disagreeable. In short, the havoc that they caused siphoned off all the attention from me, where it rightly belonged. It wasn't very long after my mother and father brought home the baby, which in fact was not 1 but 2, that I came to realize, consciously or otherwise, that I had been eclipsed by the needs and requirements of these 2 new faces on the scene. Bliss turned to chaos, and serene turned to frenetic. My mother needed help to manage these fractious siblings. Thankfully, my grandmother's visits, her mother, came more frequently after the twins arrived, and she helped with everything. But her greatest help to my mother was for her to take me out of it all, anywhere, shopping, to the hairdresser, to friends, or the zoo. She would arrive through the back door, rattling a set of keys in her hand, and as a result, I began to call her Kiki, the name and time that she became known by. Her daily visit was my one chance to break away from the chaos the other spawn had created. As it turned out, our pairing would lead to many adventures. But back to that goat. On that fateful day, we were finishing up supper, and my mother made an announcement. "I think we have some ice cream for dessert. Anybody interested?" Of course, we all perked up. When my mother bought ice cream, she always bought Neapolitan. It was a choice that was both economical and diplomatic. With a single carton of ice cream, she satisfied her entire brood: strawberry, vanilla, and chocolate. The 3 flavors made us feel like our favorite was being recognized. She made another suggestion as well. She looked over at my father and she said, "Should we have some cookies with it?" My father was a sales supervisor for the Murray Biscuit Company, and from time to time would drive home one of those big delivery trucks. One of the benefits of his employment was getting to go to the back of the truck and claim our favorite package of cookies or other snacks. And the same vintage as a Little Debbie cake, you know. That evening, when our parents encouraged us to all go out to the cookie truck, it was only a matter of who could get there first. Our front and backyards were both very large and connected by a narrow gravel lane. In the back, there was a small freestanding garage and a carport where Mother parked her car. When my dad brought one of the cookie trucks home and parked it at the back of the house, he always parked it from the carport. And the carport, you see, is where Chippy, our dog, and Willard, our cat, stayed, as our parents would not allow us to have pets in the house. But my sister was a serial rule breaker when it came to animals. You see, when my parents were away, she was notorious for letting them inside and locking herself in her bedroom with them. You could hear her in there with them, having animated conversations, as she dressed them in hats and pearls and even mother's lipstick.
Now that's a pretty chippy. Are you ready to go shopping for a new dress? Barbie, what do you think of Chippy's hat?
If you stood outside her door and listened, you would swear there was a deranged munchkin in there. Willard the cat found none of this very amusing and typically would find a way to escape when he found himself trapped in a room. He would usually just sit in the windowsill, well away from my sister, warily eyeing her. She learned she could lure Willard into her room with a can of cat food, and we learned that even a cat has its price. Inside the house was a colossal staircase, tall ceilings, and an incompetent heating system. We each had our own bedrooms. My brothers and I occupied the upstairs, and my sister was sequestered downstairs on the first floor at the foot of the staircase, well away from us. She lived in what we refer to as the cootie zone. I guess cooties still exist. I don't think we've found a cure for them yet. The house also had an entire living area attached to it, separated by a door in the hall. This is where Kiki lived. She had moved in with us after my grandfather died. It was complete with its own outside entrance to a small kitchen, which led into a large bedroom, bath, and dressing room. We loved to go in there. You see, by comparison to our part of the house, Kiki's apartment was opulent. She had a flair for decorating and for dressing. Getting to spend time with her in her apartment was real special, a great treat. It was away from the frenetic mayhem of our side of the house. But back to those cookies. We all headed out the door to the panel truck that evening. Since I was the tallest and oldest, I pulled the door open and Susan went in first, followed by Scott and Chris. Suddenly, I heard an all too familiar screech from Susan, not the sound of someone finding their favorite cookie.
It's a goat! It's a little baby goat!
There in the center of the narrow aisle between the shelves of cookie boxes stood a tiny white goat, as astonished by us as we were by her. We all huddled around as my parents and Kiki came into the truck to take part in the surprise. Typically, when animals were involved, Susan usurped ownership, despite our parents' announcement that it was for us, all of us, not just Susan. And while the goat came to us fully weaned, Susan insisted on bottle feeding her. And it was Susan, of course, who named her. Her Christian name was to be Abigail, and we were to call her Abby. My sister, Susan, loved animals, particularly furry ones. She seemed determined to establish an entire kingdom of animals for herself. Her enthusiasm went well beyond the usual dog and cat. Once she had a pet mole she kept in a large dirt-filled wash tub on the back porch until one day when Willard found him above ground and ate him. Hamsters, guinea pigs, and gerbils, essentially any member of the rodent family, soon followed after she talked my parents into buying her a rabbit at the county rabbit show. She had a knack for getting her way and for infecting others with her passion for animals. She carried this enthusiasm into commerce, selling live field mice she caught in my grandfather's corn crib. Her sales approach was very subtle and smooth, not obvious like the carnies on the midway at the county fair. You know what I mean? People who were selling whole turkey legs and funnel cakes and that sort of thing. You can imagine how they would have sold mice. Mice in a jar, come and get them! We've got mice in a jar, step right up! No, her approach was smoother. It was, she would lure them in. Hey, "Do you like animals?" she would ask to an unsuspecting seatmate on the school bus. Leaning over, she would whisper, "Want to see my mouse?" Then she would produce from her book bag a pint or quart mason jar with air holes in the lid, complete with one field mouse, some straw for bedding, and a piece of cheese or a few kernels of popcorn for a snack. "Her name's Ratsine. Want to hold her?" "Isn't she cute? Just look at those little whiskers and tiny feet." Susan was like a car salesman pointing out the newest features on an automobile. "Want to buy her? I'll sell her for 25 cents. By now the kid was totally sold and usually reaching for a quarter, half their lunch money. Abby was treated like a dog and soon thought of herself that way, crawling under the car alongside Chippy and all the other neighborhood mutts, and even getting a greasy spot on her back like the rest of them. Within a day or two, she had eaten every leaf from every shrub around the house up to a certain height. That height could be reached by standing on her hind legs and stretching to pluck every green leaf of foliage. She soon discovered Mother's red geraniums on the porch and took them down the stumps. This didn't go over well with my mom, but the goat remained. By the next week, Abby had become fully integrated into our family. Susan started bringing her into the den and bottle feeding her on the sofa while watching television. On one of those occasions, my mom came back from the grocery store and caught Susan in the act. She was furious and announced to Susan that warning that always perplexed us. "If this keeps up, that goat can just go back to where she came from." When we'd all heard this threat before, and like those other times with other animals, it never came to pass. Susan observed Mother's ban on Abby's activities in the house for about a week, but finally hit upon a loophole. It involved Kiki. It was a Saturday. We got up, ate cereal, and watched cartoons as we usually did. Susan waited for Kiki to appear, and the moment she did, she began begging her to allow Abby to come to her apartment. Kiki hesitated, but acquiesced. "Okay, only for a minute, and don't you dare tell your mother." By then, the goat had learned to follow the ritual of the other animals and waited on the back door, hoping there would be a snack or some attention for them. It was easy to know when Susan had defied Mother's orders by the sound of tiny little hooves on the hardwood floors. Like a dog, or a cat for that matter, Abby explored everything in Kiki's apartment. I knew better than to follow them, but I couldn't help from being drawn in. Neither could my brothers. We followed Kiki, Susan, and Abby through the apartment to Kiki's bedroom. Once there, Abby jumped up on a footstool and twirled around in a nimble pirouette and softly bleated, "Meh," proud of her trick. Then in the next moment, she turned back toward Kiki's dressing room mirror. And in the next instant, she dove off the stool and began to butt her head against the reflection in the mirror. "Grab her!" Kiki cried. "She's going to break the mirror!" Susan lunged for Abby, and the startled goat scuttled into Kiki's ettershade, knocking over an array of carefully assembled porcelain figurines. I knew that if my parents found out, the consequences would be assigned equally and unfairly. I'd had enough of that goat. The following day after school, I decided to walk to the Ben Franklin's 5 and Dime over on Main Street. I was old enough to go by myself, or so I thought. Susan learned what I was up to, and she heard me asking my mom. And she started in with, "Oh, I want to go. Oh, please, please." Mother said, "That's fine, but just be careful and you will be back in an hour." I ran upstairs to get my money, thinking I could slip by without Susan seeing me. But as I crept around the house toward the street, I saw Susan standing on the sidewalk and Abby next to her. I thought we could take Abby along with us. I didn't say anything. I knew she hadn't gotten permission, but I didn't want to risk my trip downtown on Susan's latest scheme. So off we went, crossing the street and headed down Main Street, toward Main Street, between the Magnus Public Library and the First Methodist Church. Now, if you think a dog draws attention from the public, try walking a baby goat on a leash with a bottle. We were suddenly the focus of everyone. Heads turned, people pointed, and out of the corner of my eye I could see men in conversation nudging one another as they saw us. The goat and my sister were like a magnet for attention. Cars slowed down to look. Children hung out of open windows of passing cars, pointing and squealing. Susan loved all the attention. And apparently Abby did too. I, on the other hand, knew this would be talked about by everyone. My parents would know it before we could get back to the house. And I just wanted to crawl under a big rock. The next day, Kiki must have known how I was feeling. She suggested, like so many times before, it was time for one of our outings. We were going to town, just the two of us. So we set out, going to all of Kiki's favorite haunts. The City Drugstore, Cato's, the women's store, and Hancock Fabrics. Next door to Cato's was the Brown Hotel, where retired farmers dressed in their overalls gathered to whittle under a large metal awning that went the length of the building, nearly half a block. Main Street on Saturdays was always busy, and everyone came for the outlying farms and communities to shop. I loved to go up there because when the Mennonites would come in, they dressed like pilgrims, and it was fun to see them going up and down the street. As we approached Cato's, I noticed a small brown chicken pecking at wood shavings at the feet of the farmers. I grabbed Kiki's purse and pulled on it for her attention. I looked up and asked her, I said, "Could I catch it and take it home?" She said, "Well, you'll have to go over there and ask one of those fellas." So I asked them, "Whose chicken is that?" One of them looked at it and said, "I reckon he's yours, son, if you think you can catch her." One of the men explained that she was a brown leghorn hen that had flown out of the back of a passing truck a few days before. I looked at Kiki, and I could tell she knew my plan. "Go ahead," she said. "That little hen couldn't be any more trouble than that goat." We crossed the street to Lady's Variety Store and went into the candy counter where Joanne Smith and a family friend worked. I asked her for a 10-cent bag of candy corn and explained I was going to try to catch that chicken across the street. She looked at me and she said, "Well, hon," as she reached beneath the counter, "I believe you'll have a lot better luck with one of these hot dog buns." I just smiled. Kiki asked her, "What is the other?" "Why, not a thing," she shot back. "Just get out there and catch that chicken, boy." As we started to leave, Joanne called out to us, "Oh, by the way, I heard that was a really cute little goat you had up here yesterday." I shrieked, shirked, dropped my head, turned around, and I wasn't used to correcting adults, but I made sure she knew, "That's not my goat, it's my sister's." Off we went, hot dog, bun in hand. We crossed the street, and I started breaking off pieces of the bun and tossing them onto the sidewalk. The chicken quickly noticed and made her way where we were. She was smallish, not like my other grandmother's big white Plymouth Rocks. She had a bright red comb that was so big it flopped over one side of her face like a big Easter hat. My plan was simple: distract her, get her close to me, and then grab her. I slowly backed up, dropping tiny crumbs. She followed, and with each successive crumb, I dropped them closer and closer to my feet. I continued, oblivious to everything around me. I was unaware that I had stopped at the front door of Cato's department store, a hen house in its own right. I squatted down when the little hen pecked at the last crumb. Then I lunged, but I missed. She flew straight up and with a loud squawk, and then she came down. She was inside potatoes. I ran in after her, following her as she scurried under the clothes rack. Every time she shot out from underneath the clothes rack, she left a trail of swirling feathers, followed by a loud This was followed by a similar sound from the women nearby. Still under the clothes racks and trying to catch sight of my bird, all I could see were women's legs and ankles racing around the room. Some dropped their purses and shopping bags and ran. I spotted the hen 2 racks away near the dressing room. I rushed towards her, but she saw me just before I could grab her, and she made one final lunge into the dressing room. I hadn't paid attention to anything around me. When I glanced up, I found myself in a small room with a large woman between apparel changes. Nothing but hose, a slip, and a bra. Her purse and shopping bag were on the bench in the corner. Between them was the hen. The chicken had had enough. As the lady screamed from the top of her lungs, I grabbed the hen and ran out the door. The whittlers were watching the scene from next door and nodded their approval as Kiki smoothed over the incident with the store manager. The commotion subsided as quickly as it had started. With my prize in hand, we walked home. I had a million questions for Kiki. Can I really keep her? Where can I put her? Does she need a nest? Will she be lonely? Can I get more? We found an old wire bird cage for her in the carport and lined it with some straw. I gave her some fresh picked clover, some water, and another hot dog bun, and decided that I'd name her Henny Penny. The next morning, I ran straight to her pen. On that Sunday morning, there were in the straw was a white, large egg, which I proudly took to Kiki. Henny Penny wasn't a goat, or furry, or cute, but she was my chicken.